Hi, everybody. So I'm excited today to introduce to you the first episode of 10 Questions with Trombone Icons. Today I'll be interviewing Jim PUGH. A little bit about Jim PUGH. He's a trombonist, composer, and educator. He was born in Camden, New Jersey, but was raised in Butler, Pennsylvania. He studied with Emery Remington at the Eastman School of Music. Upon graduating, he went on to perform, tour, and record lead trombone and solo trombone with Woody Herman's Thundering Herd in the 70s. Also in the 70s, he was a trombonist with Chick Corea's Return to Forever band. Later on, he went on to be a trombonist with Steely Dan. He still is. In around 1980, he ended up going to New York to start his career as a freelance trombonist, playing on things like film scores, records, music for television, radio advertising, etc. So Jim's the kind of trombone player that can do it all, whether it's a trombone concerto, whether he's playing lead in a big band, whether he's recording a solo for a small group jazz setting. Jim's versatility allows him to be comfortable in a number of settings. As it turns out, this interview was quite extensive, so I'm going to go ahead and break it up into two parts. Here's part one. Hey Jim, how's it going?
Pretty good. We're all still here, still sequestered in our basements,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
hiding.
Yeah, I know. I guess to get right to the interview, we'll start with question number one. What first got you into music?
When I was two, my parents, or probably it was mostly my mother, because my dad was sort of tone deaf. My mother had played violin and piano, but she got me a little 45. Well, no, I remember we had a record. We had a record player at home, I think it was a '78, because this is like 1950. Well, it was 1950, 51,
Mm-hmm.
right around in there. And I'm not actually sure if it was '78 or if they had. They probably had LPs then, but I used to always try to use the record player.
Yeah.
So and this is, I don't really remember this, but this is documented in like home movies and picture books and all that kind of stuff. But for my second birthday, my parents, or second Christmas maybe, my parents got me a little 45 RPM record player, like one of those little ones with the big fat round spindle
Mm-hmm.
and everything, and got me all these, records, the 45s, little, what were they, 5 inch, 7 inch, whatever. This is the small records with the big hole in the middle.
Yep.
And that was probably what got me into it. It's like there were certain records I liked, and they got me my own copies of those records, and they got me like, oh geez, I remember there was this one really cool one called Sparky's Magic Baton. It was about this little kid that found like a baton lying in the street or something,
Mm-hmm.
and he picked it up, and it would make the instruments of the orchestra like talk in their voice. It was the first kind of like sort of a vocoder kind of a thing that they used in this. And I went back when actually this last time. I'm sorry, I'm getting off on a
No
tangent here.
worries. Go
But
ahead.
this when we just moved, I found this case of all these 45s I had when I was a kid, and this Sparky's Magic Baton record was in there, and I opened it up, and the person who had done all the writing for this thing, and the orchestrations are fabulous. I mean, it's definitely a kid's thing. It's a story. It's a thing to introduce a kid to the instruments of the orchestra, because they go through the violin and all the different levels of the strings and all the brass, blah, blah, blah. But they all have the quality of that instrument, but then they speak, because it's this vocoder kind of, I can't remember what they called it then. But I went through and I found the record and the pamphlet that it was in, or the album that it was in, and the guy who had done all the writing was Billy May. And I was
Really?
like, oh man. So it's like, so I'm thinking, well, okay, one of these first things that I really got into was like, that's Billy May's one of the really good ones, It was like, that's a heck of a good way to get started, where you're really hearing it done right.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you listen to it now, it's a little bit corny. Actually, I tracked it down. It's actually on Spotify. You can go and
Wow.
listen to this. It's sort of cool. I mean, it's sort of interesting to go and hear this, but yeah, and it's meant for kids and everything, but it's fabulously beautifully orchestrated, and the music writing is the orchestra writing is really wonderful. But anyway, so that's what started it, and then you know my mother had me start taking piano lessons at 5, and then I you know moved on from there. But that was the original impetus, was this interest in a record player.
Wow. Strong roots.
Well, I don't know. I just for whatever reason, very fortunate that the stuff I was hearing in the beginning was,
Yeah.
written by people like Billy May.
Yeah.
So you could do a lot worse.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Okay, on to question number two. Why did you choose the trombone?
I liked the way it looked. Seriously. Well, no, because my folks moved around a lot when I was younger, and we were living in Atlanta, Georgia. And at this point, they took me to hear there was like an all city honors elementary band that was absolutely incredible. It doesn't exist anymore. It's called the Northside Highlander Elementary Band, and I went to see it, and it was like, I think because of you don't realize this when you're 10 years old, but I think the fact that I moved around a lot and was always connecting and disconnecting from friends and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
that I saw that band as like a social, a social organization and something, because playing piano is very very solitary.
Mhm.
You're always by yourself. You're not playing in ensembles. You're not playing with other people. So I the feeling as a 10-year-old, I saw that as some place where I could hang with people that that like music and stuff. And my dad had always watched Lawrence Welk, which take we take whatever grain of salt there is with that, but he liked that show. And I used to always like it when they brought, well, I'm trying to think, I think, was his name Ken? I can't remember. Jim Trimble, who was a trombone player on Buddy Rich's band back when Buddy Rich's band came out real big in the '60s, and had
Mhm.
that beautiful solo on the West Side Story Suite. But
Mhm.
his father played on the Lawrence Welk show, and I can't remember if it was always him that came down and did like the Dixieland stuff or whatever. But I remember when they would do front line, like Dixieland front line stuff. I always liked the way the trombone looked. It was the most visually active of the instruments, and I'm not sure if I even knew what it sounded like,
Wow.
but I just sort of liked it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they gave me that license to pick. It's like they sort of foisted piano on me, but then they gave me the I guess the gift of allowing me to pick then my instrument. So I sort of actually did that with my kids too. It's like we made them play piano, but their single line instruments they were able to pick themselves. And it's like sort of understanding that you see them more invested in it because they chose it
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
way. It's like, and I think that helped solidify my relationship with the instrument. Is like piano I didn't pick, but trombone was feel like that's mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
That's great. Especially a lot of times you might feel like you have like the last choice. That's all that's left, or being forced to do something.
Yeah,
Kind
and
of.
it wasn't that. I didn't have that thing like I know a lot of kids come through that in public school where they hit like fourth grade and they
Yep.
do the demo of all the instruments and everything, and there's already like 22 trumpet players, and they say, well, here, kid, why don't you play trombone or why don't you play baritone? It's like, so it's sort of like or tuba, it's like all the all the things people don't want to carry. Here,
Yeah.
why don't you play Barry sax? but but it was like it was a different setup. I wasn't given this as like a consolation prize. It was like it actually, for like again for whatever reason, and I think it was more visual than anything else. For
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
reason, I picked it. I picked it.
Yeah.
So it was cool.
That's great. Okay, on to question number 3. What trombonist or musician has had the greatest impact on your playing?
Probably because he was my first big time, you know, professional superstar trombone player, but and also a function of when I, the time I was growing up, and it was most decidedly Irby Green. There's no question, and there's other certainly other players that have been influential
Yeah.
in everything, but as far as like being I always thought it's like when you hear somebody like, when you're a kid and you hear somebody like Irby play,
Hmm.
either you're going to put the horn in the case and not touch it again, or it's going to like, basically, be like a cattle prod or
Yeah.
whatever and get you moving. It's going to go one or the other. You can't. I don't think you can't be like wishy washy about your opinion about something like that.
Hmm.
And in my case, thank goodness it spurred me on because it gives you that thing. Well, yeah, this is a level to strive for. This is showing you how how well this instrument can be played
Yeah.
and all this kind of stuff. It's not that it's just Irby. There's other incredible iconic players that we've all heard and listened to and studied and whatever. But having somebody like that to show you the possibilities
Yeah.
and open up the idea that that's the possibilities for them, and your in a way your job is to sort of take those possibilities and hopefully run with that a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, um, take that as like, okay, that's what it is now. Now, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about that? But anyway, uh, now I'm sort of off on another tangent here, but
Okay.
yeah, it was definitely Irby.
Got it. That's great. Thanks, Jim. Okay, question number 4. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are now?
I don't know, about 12 years ago, my wife and I got in a car, and, and about 17 hours later, we were here. You know? um, oh, I don't know. It's, uh, I mean, you can go through and see like the branch points sort of in your life where you could have gone one place or another,
Yep.
through whatever, through high school, um, making the choice because I had a couple places I could have gone to college and making the choice to go to Eastman
Hmm.
because of it's interesting because I go back because of advice someone had given me when I was in eighth grade
Hmm.
at a summer band camp. Who I was actually through was a guy named Robert Wigness who teaches up in Vermont. Was running this. It was State University, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, not Indiana
Hmm.
University
Interesting.
here, but in Indiana, Pennsylvania. They had a summer band camp. I was living a little bit north of Pittsburgh then, and he was running the band camp, and I was there in eighth grade. Summer like a week long. Do a silly little concert with all these kids at the end of the week,
Hmm.
and he had put this seed in there that you really should think about going to Eastman to study with Emory Remington, and
Yeah.
that always. So when it came down to a college choice time, it's like that seed sort of blossomed, and I went there. It's like, and it's weird. It's weird to think back on like little things that something somebody said at one point or another.
Hmm.
Which is why it's always you know when you're moving along, it's always nice to be encouraging to young folks. You never know what little thing you might drop or might, that is a total throwaway for you, but might have an impact on somebody, good and bad. So anyway, that's a whole other that's a whole other topic, a whole other question. But anyway, I mean, from Eastman, and then the people I met there, which is why I also talk to students about the importance of staying in touch with and networking. It's like all the people you're in school with, are the people you're going to be running into professionally for the rest of your lives, because you're all going to, it's like my generation was that, the generation after me, generation after me, your generation. It's like you're all going to be rising in the business together, and you're going to run into each other. So it's like, so through the people I met at Eastman and some of the teachers there, I ended up getting recommended to Woody Herman. After I graduated, that led to, from having gotten a little bit of notice there, set me up nicely in New York. It also set me up with, at that point, Chick Corea was putting a horn band together.
Hmm.
I'd read something about that in like a Downbeat interview, and it turned out his manager at the time was a guy by the name of Ron Moss, who was an English guy, but was also a trombone player, and he was like specialized in sort of Dixieland and trad playing, but he was a really good trombone player. And when I contacted Chick's office about that, there's too many chips. There's too many chas in my life. There's two Chips at
Yeah.
university and now Chick. But when I contacted Chick's office about wanting to find out about the horn band, because it's he was a iconic figure even back then, even way back then in the 70s. It turns out Ron knew me and had heard some of the Woody Herman stuff, and so it's like that led to that. Through a lot of people I met at Eastman and a lot of people I met on Woody Herman's band, writers. When I finally settled in New York, a lot of these people either knew me or I had met or I had worked with. I remember at Eastman, they used to have, in the summers, they used to have this thing called the Arrangers Workshop, where writers would come up. It was sort of like, it was the beginning of the whole idea of having like sort of viewing like writing study as like a laboratory situation where you have like a band on call, and you would write, the band would play and record it, and then you'd listen to the recordings and talk about it the next day. It's like Ray Wright and Manny Album were the two people that sort of built that, and it's sort of like a standard paradigm now, but it's like they were the ones who sort of like
Wow.
also, were the first ones to do that. And they would hire a band every summer to be the lab band. And all 4 years I was in school, I was in that band. So I met at that point, because Rochester is near New York City, there were all these young hotshot writers in New York would come up and either to study with them, to get good recordings of their music. There's a whole lot of reasons why they'd come up. And I met a lot of them and got to be friends with them. So then, you jump forward like 4 to 6 years later. Now, I'm done with that. Have been on Woody's band for like 4 years, Chick Corea for a couple years. Now it's like 6 years later. All those writers I met back then at the Arrangers Holiday have since gone back home to New York, the regular thing. And 6 years later, they're busy. Now they're doing a lot of jingle writing. They're writing for records and stuff. And we all got to be friends back in Rochester. So it's like calling them up. And as soon as I got there, they started using me on their sessions and stuff. And there were a bunch of other people that I met, like on Woody's band, like Ralph Burns and Tori Zito, and
Hmm.
some of those people that met through Woody that got involved with. So all of a sudden I was doing all these, Ralph Burns was doing a lot of movies then. So like right after I got to New York, I got to know him on Woody's band. He'd heard me play and all that kind of stuff. So all of a sudden I was doing well, he was doing like interesting movies. Like he did all the Muppet movies, like that one with Wally World. Or no, I'm sorry. That's the National Lampoon. That's the Vacation. Yeah, the Chevy Chase. And we did, oh, geez, trying to remember. We did, oh, all that jazz. Like he was doing all of Bob Fosse's
Okay.
movies then. We did Star 80, which was another Bob Fosse movie. There was the Chorus Line, the movie Chorus Line. But he was doing tons of movies then. So it was like, and that got me introduced. It's like all this stuff like
Wow.
pivot. So that connection got me introduced to this guy Emil Charlap, who had like the sort of main music production office, and which was like music copyists and all that stuff. And he had been good buddies with Ralph, like from back from the 40s. they grew up together. But Emil was like the busiest contractor in New York. So all of a sudden, because of this stamp of approval from Ralph, all of a sudden Emil's starting to use me on all of his stuff. So it's just one thing
Yeah.
leads to another, and then everything changed.
Huh.
That whole, because of being very early on influenced by Irby Green, I also was influenced by his career path too.
Okay.
He was basically doing a lot of road stuff, and then going to New York. I know Irby had more of the wanting to be, and should have been wanting to be like a soloist, all that kind of stuff, but going to New York and being like a busy studio guy.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to Irby at one point. He said that deep down, all he ever really wanted to do was go back to Mobile and play jazz.
Oh man.
Like the studio thing was one thing. It was great and it was good money, and it made things really nice. But it's like in his heart,
Yeah. Yeah.
in his heart was just this guy that wanted to just play some trombone. Um, but anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, so anyway, sort of following this path. But like I said, so my whole thing about New York was set up on wanting to go there and freelance and do, session work where things are changing all the time because it's like it was that whole thing. Whether you love the music you're playing or you hate the music you're playing, in a couple hours you'll never have to see it again. Which can be good and bad. It's like if it's incredible music, it's sad that you're not going to see it again. And you can give your all to something that you're not that thrilled about for an hour or two. It's sort of a really nice situation. Plus, there's the variety of like it's always. Well, that was always fun. I remember in the mornings when we used to be heading out every morning with my horn on my back, going out to do setting every morning, and not knowing what it was you were going to walk into.
Interesting. Exciting. Yeah.
Which is really cool. It was very exciting. I mean, it was very rarely. I mean, it's that. Well, they talk about that with a lot of careers, like flying an airplane or brain surgery or whatever. That's like, like they're like 98% boredom and 2% sheer terror, and it was very much like that. It's like, more often than not, it was just you'd just be play parts that were, but every once in a while, like this thing, every once in a while was the day the guns pointed at your head.
Mm.
And that was cool because it sort of it was impetus to keep you practicing, even if things were a little bit slow or whatever, because you didn't know what it is once you walk in that door, you didn't know what was going to be sitting on the music stand in front of you. This could be the day. And if this is the day you got caught with your pants down, well, that the word about that gets around fast.
Yeah.
So it was a good good incentivization or whatever. But anyway, like and little by little, I mean, things changed in New York, and it became like now it's really set up where you sort of have to have a Broadway show, and I never was real great with the repetition of Broadway shows, because that really wasn't what I went there to do. As much as I love a lot of the music from Broadway and all that kind of stuff, and but it sort of was a change, and then the offer to come out to University of Illinois came in and said, like, this is a good time. Things have changed there, and I'm not as happy as I was, musically, and it's
Yeah.
so it's like one thing sort of leads to another, and it was the right time because I came out here when I was, I guess, mid-50s or whatever, and it's that's a good time. Had like a 30-year run in New York. That was
That's
that was fine. Had a great time, and the thing is now it's like now I think when people go to New York, you go there knowing exactly what it is.
mhm.
It's like it's the well now it right now it isn't, but when things get back to some semblance of normal Broadway, then the theater will be back.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now that's the core of the work, and I think most people going there understand that, and that's what they're going to do. It's like the thing from my viewpoint is I went to do something else, and it sort of turned into that. So it's like I never was able to totally wrap my head around that change, which is, you know,
Yeah.
inflexibility on my part, but not necessarily good. But I like being where I am now. So
Yeah. No, we're glad to have you here.
right, that's a long answer.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's it's that kind of question. So yeah, thanks for sharing, Jim. So question number 5: what's it like touring with Woody Herman and Steely Dan? You know, just to maybe give some of us a general sense of what it's like to be on tour with these big names.
Well, difference between Steely Dan and Woody Herman. Woody, we were on like buses that were just buses. They were like buses, like Greyhound buses with seats,
Yeah.
and all you had one, you know, two seat thing to yourself and the little area above your head, and there was a clothes rack. They knocked out a couple seats in the back of the bus and had a clothes rack back there for all the uniforms,
Mhm.
which they were like they were always like these polyester. Like I remember the last one we were wearing were like these sort of light, oh, in between like sky blue and navy blue, like sort of mid kind of blue, like
Mhm.
polyester leisure suits with like polyester yellow shirts. You know, we had had these costumes that we wore. So the back of the bus would get a little, you know, a little locker roomish,
Yeah. Yeah.
sort of, from depending on how good everybody was about washing their costumes or their uniforms.
Oh.
Um, but yeah, so I mean that was crowded. That was, and you had the whole band on the bus all the time. And I remember back then I mean, we used that was back when smoking was okay too. So people would be smoking on the bus. I mean, it was a different time. This is like, well, I guess I went on the band in 1972, so it's you know, it's way before probably most of your listeners were born. But um, then Steely Dan, it's like we're on these rock and roll buses that are like there's only five or six of us on a bus. Everybody has their own bunk. There's like a lounge with a whole elaborate like audio system and TV, you know, big widescreen TVs in the front and the back, and nice tables and comfy chairs and all this kind of stuff. And it's, I mean, the traveling conditions are quite a bit different because we're playing to a lot more people.
Yep.
You know, well, the things got over the progression of the time I was with Woody. We went from, remember when I first joined the band, we were doing mostly like dance gigs, like at, you know, at American Legion halls and you know, Rotary Club, you know, doing like real. It was really a dance band
Yeah.
at that point. You know, it had gone from like in the '60s with the, you know, the Bill Chase, Phil Wilson, Sal Nestico, Jake Hanna band. From that band, which had been, they'd been doing like a lot of clubs and was really a jazz band.
Mhm.
Then just to keep it alive, to keep it going, because Woody wanted to stay on, you know, wanted to keep the band going.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it had boiled down to they had to do these dance gigs. You're doing these dance gig after dance gig after dance gig. And over the course of the time I was, the 4 years I was on the band, it pivoted into, by the time I left, we were doing more um, like school concerts, like clinics in the afternoon and then concerts at night. It's like
Yeah.
the all those bands had sort of tapped into the market and also the importance, and found like a new audience in the educational side
Yeah.
of jazz, you know. And all these bands, Maynard's band, well, Stan Kenton had been there all along. I mean, he had those Kenton camps from back in the '50s, and I think even back in the '40s. I'm not sure how far back the Kenton camps go, but he'd been very active, as you know, actively involved in education
Mhm.
from way back. But all the band. I mean, Buddy's band. I'm trying to think. Certainly Maynard's band, Kenton's band. I'm trying to think what other bands are out there. And then a few other young bands like Don Ellis's band and stuff came in to sort of like piqued everybody's interest in big bands again. And also the band started doing like covers of rock and roll tunes. I mean, I remember Woody put out an album called Light My Fire, and there were two of them that he had done with this writer actually from Chicago by the name of, I think his name was Richard Evans, that wrote a bunch of charts on, it was basically, like I said, a bunch of pop covers. And they were doing McCarthy, every basically like Maynard's band and Woody's band, I think Kenton's band too. They all had these elaborate ending numbers of this elaborate suite on MacArthur Park with the trumpets going out in the audience, and everybody sort of did it the same way. There was always a trombone solo on the ballad part of it. It was like every chart was different, but they were the same. But it was, it was a way of keeping it alive, and it got a whole new audience interested in big bands and got a lot of people playing the music again. I think that's one thing that, I think like Winton and Jazz at Lincoln Center, like their approach to big band awareness and how it ties into education is trying to get back to what the sort of the roots of it was, because the whole like at that period that we were doing that, like Woody and Maynard and Buddy and all that kind of stuff, was trying to get young people interested in it through big bands playing the popular music. And I think Winton's approach is trying to get people interested by the bands playing the music that was the roots of how these bands came into being. Fair It's probably both approaches are valid. They're just sort of different ways that trying to get to the same thing. You're trying to get to the same thing of getting young people interested in these acoustic instruments and acoustic music and improvisation. Like however you get an audience there, get people interested in it again is valid. It's just again two different approaches.
Interesting.
I'm not sure if I even. I think I lost what the question was.
What's it like touring? Yeah, you're being very.
Touring. I mean, touring was fine. It's I always find it sort of interesting because if you look at like the way this is going off another tangent, but if you look at the way like symphony orchestras travel, where if they go more than 3 feet past the hotel, then they have to have a valet come and carry their horn for it's like there's an amazing amount of coddling. Like it's like I always had this thing, well, okay, all you people playing, traveling with these symphony orchestras, you've practiced just as long as we have. It's like you should go on a road band for a month, and then so I come to like the Steely Dan stuff, the way that group travels now compared to what I did for 4 years on Woody's band is like it's like living in a king's palace, in a way. So it's like I guess in a way, not that you have to like grovel in the dirt or anything, but it's like I look at the way like Steely travels as like sort of a gift with the road thing, because we never do more than, well, again, because the show's resting on Don Fagen's voice, so without him and without that quality of his vocal quality, it's not Steely Dan anymore. So it's like his voice and sort of protecting that voice is very important. So we never, I think every once in a while we'll do 3 in a row, but very rarely. Usually it's 2, just because he's carrying the whole show on his vocal cords, so
Yeah.
so it's like that's really easy. So you have a lot of days off, and I go back. I've got this pack of like all my old Woody Herman itineraries, and I go back and look at them and say, man, it's like we were doing like a lot of 7 days a week
Wow.
things, and traveling, and doing 300-400 mile bus trips I remember actually one point early on, within the first year I was on the band, I think we actually went on strike to get them down to where we would never travel more than 400 miles on a gig day. Because it was getting to the point we were like, it was like we weren't even checking into the hotel. We would just be on the bus from like 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. and have to go straight to the gig. We were doing like 550 miles and doing a gig that same day. It was killing us. So we got it back to where it was reasonable. But yeah, comparatively, it's like gravy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the nice thing with Steely Dan, and it was pretty close to Woody's band. I mean, everybody got on Woody's band got along. You hear a lot of these stories about road bands getting pretty, some of the arguments on the bus getting pretty interesting.
Oh man.
Because you got a bunch of people from different, backgrounds. It's like the whole Steely Dan thing. 'Cause I've been doing that for about 20 years now, and over time, it's evolved into the band it is now. And part of that is you just have I mean, everybody in the band has a different personality, but everybody in the band really gets along well. And I think everybody has a lot of respect for everybody else that's there, both personally, intellectually, musically, all that kind of stuff. So it's a really nice, functional family,
That's great.
which is sort of cool. So that makes it easier too. The fact that everybody gets along well,
Mm-hmm.
and so anyway, I don't know if that answers the question, but
Yeah,
it
that's yeah,
bounces around the question a lot.
no, that's great. Well, I talked about two different tours that you kind of went, not two different tours, two different artists that you went on tour with
Yeah,
bands. But that's yeah, that's more than enough. Thanks, Jim.
two different budget levels.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what it sounds like. So it's a world of difference. So it's pretty
Oh,
cool.
Woody's band also, we had to pay for our own hotel rooms, and with Steely
Wow,
Dan, we don't pay for our hotels.
wow, wow.
But this is back. I mean, this is how long ago that was. This was back. The band would pay anything, and anything for the hotel over $11. So we were getting hotels for like $9, $10. This was back when Hotel Six and Super Eights and stuff. That eight was there because that's what the rooms cost.
Wow, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah, that's where they got that. So we would stay in those kind of hotels, and very rarely that the band actually had to pay. Like if you got a $12 or $13 room, this was like you're staying at the Four Seasons or something.
Yeah, yeah.
No, but it's like we were like the band paid anything over $11. Yes, Sonny, I remember when gas was only 25 cents a gallon. It's like it has that vibe to it, but it was so that part was very different. Anyway,
Wow. Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Jim. All right, so that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Jim Pugh. There's a lot of gems in there. If you found this video useful or interesting, please like it and share it, and consider subscribing to my channel. If you have any questions or thoughts, please leave them down below in the comments section. And until then, we'll see you all next time. Bye.